The paradox of form. What does it mean to structure form? At first glance, the question seems tautological. Form, by definition, implies structure. Yet a closer examination reveals that the relationship between form and structure is neither linear nor self-evident. Rather than static or mechanical, structure can be understood as a generative principle, the invisible arrangement that renders form legible across perception, cognition, and reality. This video examines how composition, organism, and field operate as interlinked modalities of structuring form. By reframing structure as a dynamic and even spiritual function, we open a new space for understanding how coherence emerges across scales and dimensions of experience. Composition, the frame as agreement. In the traditional lexicon of art and design, structure is often synonymous with composition. Composition is the deliberate arrangement of elements, shape, line, color, rhythm, into a coherent whole. It is a technique, a methodology, and a grammar. But it is also more than that. Composition is a set of relational agreements that condition the viewer's sense of orientation within a space. From the symmetry of classical architecture to the rule of thirds in photography, compositional norms invite perceptual stability. They calibrate the relationship between parts and whole, foreground and background, object and void. The etymology of structure points us toward this foundational act of arrangement. Derived from the Latin struere, meaning to build or to arrange, the term evokes the act of placing in order, of forming intelligibility through spatial logic. In this sense, structure is not necessarily about rigidity or permanence. Instead, it suggests an intentional logic through which multiple elements converge and achieve expressive clarity. But the compositional tradition is not a monolith. In modern and contemporary practices, structure often arises through asymmetry, tension, and disruption. A Jackson Pollock drip painting or an Agnes Martin grid may not follow classical principles, but they evoke a resonant internal order. Thus, composition, whether symmetrical or not, reveals that structure is not just a visible arrangement, but a felt coherence. It is a silent agreement between form and viewer, sensation and meaning. Organism. Structure as emergence. While composition reveals the aesthetic and perceptual function of structure, the study of organic systems pushes us further. Biological form is not composed in the artistic sense. It is grown. A shell spirals in accordance with logarithmic ratios. Branching patterns recur in river deltas, tree limbs, and neural pathways. These forms are not arbitrary, but emerge from underlying principles of self-organization. Here, structure is not imposed from above, but arises from within, what we might call endogenous structure. In the context of living systems, structure is a recursive negotiation between form and function. The spine is not merely a mechanical support. It is a central axis through which multiple bodily systems cohere. The skeletal structure develops in concert with muscular tension, fluid dynamics, and environmental adaptation. In this way, biological form is always in flux, conditioned by developmental history and responsive to changing conditions. The philosopher Gilbert Simondon offers a helpful framework here, distinguishing between the form of a technical object and its structure. For Simondon, form is the imprint or mold, while structure refers to the dynamic internal relations that allow the object to maintain coherence across transformations. Applying this to the organism, we can say that structure is the internal logic by which life sustains its form across change. It is not fixed, but generative. Structure, in this sense, becomes a kind of intelligence, not conscious in the human sense, but intelligible as a mode of living pattern. This organic perspective reframes structure not as an external imposition, but as a processual unfolding. It suggests that to structure form is not necessarily to plan or design it, but to enable its emergence. Structure is that which allows life to articulate itself coherently across multiplicity. Field, the invisible matrix. To speak of form as emerging from fields is to enter a subtler register of inquiry, one that bridges physics, philosophy, and metaphysics. In contemporary science, the concept of a field denotes a region of influence in which certain forces or values operate continuously across space. Electromagnetic fields, gravitational fields, and quantum fields define not just the behavior of particles, but the very conditions under which form can appear. Some theorists extend this model into the realm of biology and consciousness. Rupert Sheldrake's notion of morphogenetic fields, though controversial, exemplifies an alternative approach. According to this hypothesis, the form of an organism is shaped not solely by genetic codes, but by fields of formative influence that operate through time and memory. Once a form arises in nature, it becomes easier for that form to recur, a kind of ontological resonance or structural habit. In artistic and spiritual traditions, similar ideas are echoed in the language of energy, aura, or subtle body. Sacred geometry, for instance, presumes that form is governed by vibrational laws, where geometric patterns resonate with fundamental principles of being. The mandala, the spiral, the vesica piscis, these are not merely decorative but serve as symbolic representations of cosmic structuring fields. To structure form through field, then, is not to arrange matter, but to tune resonance. The field precedes the form. What we perceive as shape is a crystallization, a momentary condensation of dynamic relations within a larger energetic matrix. Structure becomes an invisible lattice, an architecture of potential made manifest through attention, intention, and presence, toward a spiritual topology of structure. If composition reveals the visual grammar of structure and organism discloses its biological intelligence and field gestures toward its metaphysical coherence, then what unites them is their shared function as mediators of sense. Structure is not merely the infrastructure of form, it is the condition by which form is rendered perceptible, thinkable, livable. From this perspective, structure is not a limit, but a passage. It is the threshold across which form becomes experience. In mystical terms, structure is the scaffolding of incarnation, the vehicle through which the ineffable enters the visible world. This is not to romanticize structure as a spiritual absolute, but to recognize its capacity to hold, transmit, and transform meaning. Indeed, there is a paradox here. Structure is often associated with control, regulation, and fixity, but the most profound structures are those that allow for transformation, mutation, and improvisation. Jazz, architecture, ritual, conversation, each relies on structure not to constrain expression but to enable it. The more subtle the structure, the more fluid the form it supports. This suggests that structure, in its most evolved sense, is not rigidity but responsiveness. It is the form that listens, the structure that breathes, the field that remembers. In such cases, structure approaches a spiritual topology, not merely a map of spatial relations, but a pattern of coherence across states of being. Coherence. To structure form is to articulate coherence. Whether through artistic composition, biological emergence, or metaphysical resonance, structure serves as the silent principle that holds multiplicity in relation. It is not an aesthetic afterthought, nor a functional necessity, but a living grammar of becoming. As we deepen our understanding of form, we must also refine our perception of structure, not as an object or outcome, but as a process of attunement. To ask how form is structured is to ask how reality is made coherent. And in that question we glimpse something profound, not only the nature of things but the nature of knowing itself.